Chidananda Dasgupta is a legendary figure for film critics and filmmakers in post-independence India. Perhaps the first serious writer on film who became the doyen of film critics, who joined up with Satyajit Ray and a handful of others to start the Calcutta Film Society in 1947. His love for cinema was so deep that he resigned later from a lucrative job with the then Imperial Tobacco Company to launch into films himself. He produced and directed a number of documentaries and made 2 feature films, Bilat Bherat and then Amudini, which won his wife Shupriya the National Award for Costume Design. Apart from articles in newspapers and magazines over 50 years, he authored a number of books, among them talking about films, The Painted Face, Studies in India's Popular Culture, and The Cinema of Satyajit Ray, and his last one, Seeing is Believing, Selected Writings on Cinema. In addition, he translated Jivananda Das's poetry from Bengali into English. His progeny too has done him proud. One of his daughters, the eldest one, is actress-director Aparna Sen, and now so is his granddaughter, Aparna's daughter, Konkana Sen Sharma. Not many writers on cinema can match such a background, such a range of accomplishments. It is an exemplary life story. After founding the Calcutta Film Society, the Federation of Film Societies in India was set up at his initiative together with Satyajit Ray, Vijaya Mule, and a few others. This federation played a major role in the spread of the Film Society movement in India. I met him many years ago. I had just come back to India on a visit from my film school days in Paris. I stopped first in Bombay to meet some film people and see what was happening, to know and understand it myself, and to respond to questions about Indian cinema at my film school in Paris. And then I was also preparing to write my thesis, but that was much later. This was in the mid-50s, when very little about other cinemas was known in all countries. It was a fascinating moment, and I was very excited at discovering the cinema of India as much as the cinemas of other countries. Meeting Chidananda Dasgupta together with B.D. Garga at a film function in Bombay was an enriching moment. I will never forget it. It went on to last my life. Chidananda was still working with his company, but it was clear that his passion was cinema. Years went by as he continued working in Calcutta, and I was in France. But we did meet occasionally, and it was clear that he wanted to give up his job and be in the film world. And eventually he did. He made some documentary films but continued with his job. His first feature film, Bilat Bherat, was well received but did not attract very strong attention. Popular cinema was ruling the audience and the film world at that time. But he continued making documentaries which did reasonably well. His first was Portrait of a City, a documentary on Calcutta produced by the Calcutta Film Society. Then his first feature film, Bilat Bherat, in 1972, which was also fairly well received. Fairly because at that time popular Hindi cinema was ruling the film world. He kept up with writing, but his love for filmmaking continued, and he made a collection of 3 short features called Shnar, the bull, Gadha, the donkey, and Rattu, blood, which featured his daughter Aparna Sen, who was on her way to becoming the great actress and now a celebrated director. Then two more documentaries. A beautiful one on Biju Maharaj called Biju, and then Dance of Shiva. He made his second feature, Amodini, in 1994, which attracted a great deal of praise, but he decided not to devote his life to making films, though his work on both documentaries and his work on feature films were really good, but that was not an era where they made such a big impact. But they remained very important in the development of Indian cinema. He wrote a wonderful script called Prince on Dwarkanath Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore's grandfather. This almost got made by the British Film Institute, which had approved it. Victor Banerjee had agreed to play Dwarkanath. His daughter Aparna was to be his chief assistant, but sadly the project fell through at the last minute. I suppose for financial reasons, he had a family to support. He took on a job as editor of the magazine published by the American Embassy in Delhi for a few years. That was the time he and I met frequently as they lived nearby. That is when Chidu and I sat and wrote the script for a feature film in Hindi, but alas, we were not able to raise the money for it. And then I came up with the idea of starting a film journal. At that time, I thought of a journal of Asian, African, and Latin American cinema with Chidananda. We kept discussing it, and he said, it'll be not easy to do 3 continents. How will we do it? And I said, yes, that will be a bit difficult. We kept discussing the possible ways to raise money for that, but of course it could not happen. Then I thought of starting a magazine exclusively on Asian cinema. I told Chitu I thought of the name Cinemaya, and he liked it very much. I put the name on my board next to my desk and kept dreaming of it, but it took a long, long time to materialize. Later, Chitu joined INTAC, International Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, which had recently come into being. And he planned a series of documentary films for Doordarshan for INTAC. Approval of the series was held up for a long time by Doordarshan. One day when he and I were talking about it, I said I could talk to them because a college friend of mine had recently become head of Doordarshan. Happily, the series was approved. I joined Chidananda, his nickname was Chitu, at INTAC, and we got approval for the first series of 13 documentary films. Chitu made the first film, and I made the 13th film, the last one. We got a number of talented directors, some already established, some out to make their first films, to direct the series. Among the directors were Rajiv Mehrotra, now the founder and head of PSBT, Public Service Broadcast Trust, and a number of others making their first film, plus Pramod Mathur, a very well-established documentary filmmaker, and other equally well-known directors to do the series. There is so much one can write about Chidananda's writings, which should be made compulsory reading for film students. He wrote many articles for us in Cinemaya, the magazine which finally did get started on Asian cinema. Chitu wrote principally on Indian cinema and Indian filmmakers, and his writings have become classics. When Fipresci Federation, the International Federation of the Film Press, Fipresci is a worldwide organization. It was established in India because the President and Secretary of Fipresci, both of whom I knew, had come to IFFI, the International Film Festival of India, and told me they were so disappointed that Fipresci was not getting established at India's main festival. I went and spoke to the Secretary I&B Ministry, and finally they agreed to set it up. Once it was established, we all voted for Chidananda to be the president. But he kept saying, no, no, Aruna should be president. I think he didn't want to take on any more responsibility at that stage in his life. He wanted to do his own thing, and he was writing and he was watching a lot of films. But I said, no question of that. When you are there, you are the senior-most person in the film world of writing. So you have to be president, and we all agreed on that. Finally, he did not have a choice. He had to take it on and become the first president of Fipresci in India. And of course, he did a very good job for 4 or 5 years, and then he retired. He spent a very busy time and a full life with books, writing, making films, and inspiring many of us in different ways, from his writings, from his talks, from what he had to say about cinema. He was quite an incredible inspiration for many, many people. As we came to the end of the series at Intact, Chitu and Shupriya, his wife, they decided to leave Delhi and move to Shantiniketan, near Calcutta, where his eldest daughter Aparna was established. He said, enough, I've had enough, I've done enough, now I want to go and just enjoy the end years. So they wanted to live peacefully in a beautiful setting with his wife and youngest daughter. So they moved to Shantiniketan. Before he left Delhi, he was presented with the Lifetime Achievement Award by Oceans. He had made such immense contributions to the emerging new cinema and the established cinema through his writings, opening your eyes to the way even Satyajit Ray or Ritik Ghatak or Mrinal Sen or many of the directors' films were and a lot of Hindi films also that people were looking at, but his writings made one penetrate deeper into what was being shown and understand it better, thanks to him. And he, despite all the obligations in his life, he managed to make some films from work, and then he had a highly talented family, from wife to daughters. His wife herself was a writer in Bengali, who also translated books and various writings from Bengali into, from Hindi into Bengali, or from Bengali into different languages. I know she translated some books from Japanese into Bengali also. She was a very talented young woman. He kept telling me to come and visit them in Shantiniketan, and I really wanted to, having always wanted to visit that lovely place, but I never managed it. Then, when his wife passed away, he moved to Aparna's flat in Calcutta just for a short time, and then he went. Then I did go there to visit him, and those last days have left a vivid memory in their house when he was about to leave us. In his writings, there is a depth of knowledge and understanding of the art and craft of filmmaking, together with a sense of the history and development of cinema in India and internationally. It's a joy to relish a collection of his essays on films within a single book. The collection of books he wrote and his writings over many years is dense and erudite, yet witty and humorous, as he makes references to the sociological, historical, and political background to the films and the directors he's writing about. One of his essays of Margi and Desi set the tone of his writing, as he makes the same distance between the classical and the folk for cinema as there is in the other arts, particularly music. His point of reference is not just the frequently quoted Natya Shastra, but the 13th century treatise, the Sangeet Ratnakara which makes a clear distinction between divine and popular music. And he goes on to elaborate on the implications and ramifications of this distinction, which he points out the English translator had not included. It is an illuminating inquiry into the origins of this division and turns into a fascinating exploration of the relationship of cinema to the other arts. Very few people were writing at that level in that time, and now perhaps it's even less, because where is the place to write about cinema? In newspapers now, in those days, there was plenty of space to write about films, about what was going on, about your opinion of the kind of films that are being made. But now there's very little space, just a para or two about a new film, or some newspaper might sometimes give a larger space for one film, but not as a regular feature, which it used to be in those days. His answer in his article, Why Films Sing, transcends a mere description of music and songs in Indian cinema, as he expounds on the psychological and sociological imperatives that make it such an integral part of India's cinemas. In his other article, Women, Non-Violence and Indian Cinema, he relates the traditional Indian view of women as non-violent, passive, to the non-violence Mahatma Gandhi used as a weapon against the British, and sees the ideal feminine in Indian cinema as a corollary of social forces. His essay on films as visual anthropology is a unique analysis of the work of Aravindan, of Prema Karans, Fani Amma, and others. And unfortunately, there's not enough being written about Aravindan or Prema Karans, and they were very important filmmakers in the 60s in India when the new wave was starting, but not enough exists on their work, which is most unfortunate. So what Chitu wrote is very, very important. Then in his articles, from the crisis in film studies to how Indian is Indian cinema, to cinema takes over the state, about politics and cinema in South India, his writings stretch the boundaries of knowledge, provoke the reader to question, to argue, to make connections, rather than to passively receive, and it makes you think about what he's writing about. His writings were a boon in an area where some people, not alas all, looked at cinema as a great form of art, not just of entertainment. Both were vividly present in Indian cinema, as indeed in most countries, which is perfectly justified. Great form of art, great entertainment, makes you think, makes you enjoy what you're watching. Cinema is really something that needs to be taken much more seriously as a form of both entertainment and understanding and visualizing and understanding and connecting with the world. Both art and entertainment were vividly present in Indian cinema at that time, as indeed in most countries, and also necessary, because cinema is indeed a very relaxing form of entertainment, and it is very much needed in all societies. You need to think, you need to be provoked into looking at life in a special way through serious cinema, but you also need to go to the cinema just to relax and be entertained. So cinema is an incredible medium of thought, relaxation, understanding, opening the world, and a lot of unfortunately people don't realize what cinema can do to you, but Chidananda did, and his articles prove that. But together with that, is also a cinema that provokes one's imagination and thought and helps to understand the way life is and to cope with it. Understanding all this at a time when very few people really looked at it in that manner, he wrote regretfully, film criticism has practically disappeared. This was much later, towards the end of the life, when he, in Delhi and Bombay and Calcutta, when he decided to step down and move to Shantiniketan. That's when he wrote, and I'll repeat it, film criticism has practically disappeared. In all the newspapers, the accent is on lifestyle writing. There is hardly any space for film writing anymore. In the past, cinema was dependent on what critics wrote. There is so much one can write about his writings, which should be made compulsory reading for film students. He wrote many articles for us in Cinemaya, principally on Indian cinema and Indian filmmakers, which are classics. He spent a very busy time and a very full and meaningful life. I miss Chidananda very much.